All right, so we'll say good morning, an incredible daf ahead of us today. Let us begin by thanking our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar, Paul and Kathy Pollack, in memory of Paul's grandparents, Dina Bas Pesach and Zechariah ben Zechariah, whose yahrzeits are in the month of Adar. Our week of learning sponsors, Karen and Akiva Noach Andrews, for the yahrzeit of Karen's mother, Marsha Bas David Bechana. We thank our Daf Yomi sponsor today, Mel Ram, Le'iloi Nishmas, his grandmother, Esther Bas Yaakov, whose yahrzeit is today. We hope in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. Well, so with that, let us begin. A lot of incredible Gemara to do today. Well, first of all, just a lot of Gemara to do today, and then in Mir Tzashem also a lot of incredible Gemara. So we're picking up today's daf is Peites 89. We are picking up in Mir Tzashem on Pei Chesamud Beis. A lot to do. So we'll say we are picking up. Pam Achas. It's in the wide lines on Pei Chesamud Beis. 2, 4, 5 lines in. So as I remember again, we ended off the discussion yesterday with this concept, ultimately again, of the distinction between the Melech and Malka and regular people when it comes to shechting two animals for the purpose of Korban Pesach. Rabbi Gamliel was running. Rabbi Gamliel said for the Melech and Malka it works. For regular people it doesn't work, as we discussed yesterday. Another story. Pam Achas Nimtzeis Hal Tabe Beis Hamid Bachim. One time they found a lizard in the butchering area, the kitchen of the king and the queen. So what happens? And the servants figured, listen, if there's a lizard which is a sheretz over there, they thought there was a dead sheretz, it must be that the entire su'uda is tameh. So they came and they asked the king, what should we do? So the king said, go and ask the queen. So they came and they asked the queen, what should we do? Go and ask Rabbi Gamliel what we should do. So we'll say, watch this. Also. So they came and they asked Rabbi Gamliel, Amr lahem beis mitbachim roseach otsonin. So listen to this. So Rabbi Gamliel said, tell me, when you found the lizard, did you find the lizard, like Pashtos, they found the lizard like by a pot of food, in a pot of food. So did you find the lizard in a pot of hot food or in a pot of cold food? So Amr lo roseach, they said, oh, we found it in a pot of hot food. Amr lahem lechu vatilu alea kol shel tzonin. Go and pour some cold water over the lizard. So they went ahead and they poured some cold water over the lizard. And the lizard moved, so the lizard wasn't dead. The lizard was alive. It just, I guess, fell into a sleep because of the heat, right? Therefore, they woke it up. Now, obviously, remember, a sheretz only conveys tumah if it's dead. Right? If the sheretz is not dead, then by definition it does not convey tumah. So it turns out that Vitir Rabbi Gamliel kol hasuda kula, and Rabbi Gamliel was able to be matar, was able to go ahead and declare tar the entire suda. Nimtza melech talui b'malka, v'nimtzeis malka talui Rabbi Gamliel. So we'll say it turns out it's actually an interesting gemara. The king is dependent on the queen, right? Because remember again, the king would never make a decision on his own, but rather again the king would say consult with the queen. The malka would consult, right, was dependent on Rabbi Gamliel. Nimtzeis kala suda tli Rabbi Gamliel. Turns out that the entire suda was dependent on Rabbi Gamliel. Beautiful. So again, there's a lot to say in that Gemara as well, but we'll have to save it for a different time. Shachach masham l'rabo. So remember again, the next case in the Mishnah was as follows. Next case in the Mishnah was where the master told the servant a particular animal, right? He wanted a goat, not a lamb. So what happens? We'll say in this case, both the servant and the master forgot which animal. They just forgot. So remember again, what did the Mishnah say? So the Gemara says, Ketzad yaseh yishchat tala ugdi. So in this case, I'm sorry. This is the servant forgot what the master told him. That's what happens over here. So the Mishnah gives an interesting strategy. The Mishnah says the servant should shecht both, and he should go ahead and say, listen, if my master wanted a goat, the goat will be his, the lamb will be mine, and so on and so forth. So the Gemara says, how could that happen? Shali, mashikam kanarabo. We'll say this is an Eved Kanani. An Eved Kanani has no power of ownership. If he has no power of ownership, how could he say one will be mine and one will be my master's? Rabbi holich itzel ra haragil etzlo, haragil rabo etzlo. So we'll say, so again, the Gemara gives an interesting eitzah. The Gemara says he goes to a shepherd who his master has a good relationship with. The Eved explains the situation to the master. And above, I remember again, there is a concept of conveying ownership to an eved on the condition that the master has no rights in the object. You can convey ownership to an eved in such a circumstance like that. Good. Shachach rabo masha amarlo. Both say what happens next case in the Mishnah. What happens in this case where the master forgot what he told the servant. Shachach rabo masha amarlo. So both say, so in this case over here, assuming that once again so now the eved forgot both. The eved didn't remember. The master didn't remember. So in this case, the Mishnah said, interestingly enough, everybody's Yotzei Karban Pesach, but neither carbon can be consumed. Neither carbon can be consumed. So the Gemara says, Amra Rabbi, lo shanu ela sheshachach achar zrika. This is only true if the master forgot what he had told the servant after zrika. Because we'll say, as long as at the time of zrika the master did remember, that means the master was part or had a proper carbon pesach. If he subsequently forgot, okay, so he can't consume because he doesn't know which carbon is his. But as long as at the shas zrika he knew which carbon, which animal he wanted, we're good to go. The Gemara says, I'm sorry. But if the master had forgotten which animal was his or which animal he wanted prior to zrika, so therefore at the time of zrika, the master was not tethered to any particular animal. So therefore, what lo havi chazil achila? Therefore, carbon was never really fit for consumption, and therefore chayavin lasos pesach sheni. In that case, therefore, alocha lamaisa, the master and the eved would be chayiv to participate in pesach sheni. So we'll say Abaye's distinction is a very interesting one. When do we say that if the master forgot which type of animal, that although he can't eat his carbon pesach, he's yotzei carbon pesach and doesn't have to do pesach sheni? So interestingly enough, that's only when he forgot after zrika. So b'shas zrika, he was part of a carbon, part of a proper carbon, and ultimately again yotzei. But if he forgot before zrika, then it turns out he was not part of a carbon, and if he was not part of a carbon, then halacha l'maisa, he would need to go ahead and do Pesach Sheni. So the Gemara says, Ika demasni, there's another version of this as well. Ika demasni la braisa. Some really attach the statement of Abai to the following braisa. Interesting case. Chamisha shenes arvu oros pischei and zubazu. So let's say you have 5 carbon Pesachs, right? Five carbon Pesachs. Remember again, remember we saw this, I don't remember, maybe it's towards the end of the 3rd or the 4th parak, that remember again, what would they do with their carbon Pesach? You would shecht it by the Beis HaMikdash. And then remember what they would do is they would offer up the sacrificial parts, and then they would take the meat and put it in the hide, right? And kind of throw it over their shoulder. Kitaya, the Gemara said. That was the last Gemara in one of the previous prakim. Like a merchant. So we'll say, so now watch, because remember the hide you got to keep from Karban Pesach. So we'll say, so let's say the following case. You have five karbanos, 5 Karban Pesachs. So what happens? The name says Yabelas be'echad mehen, and you find Yabelas is literally a wart. Now, for our purposes, Yabelas is a mum, which would disqualify. So we'll say, so now what ends up happening over here is you already offered up the carbon Pesach, and maybe you even consumed it already, and then afterwards you go ahead and you find a wart on one of the hides, which means one of the 5 karbanos did not work. Right, was invalid, was puzzle. So what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, Kulan, well, again, this is a case, just to be clear, this is a case where zrika was already done, but maybe the consumption did not yet happen. The consumption did not yet happen. So the Gemara says, what's the halacha? Kulan yotzlan beis asreifa. So you have to burn all of the animals, right? You have to burn all of the carcasses because nothing's fit for consumption because one of them is puzzle. You don't know which one is puzzle. However, none of the people involved have to do Pesach Sheni. So it's an interesting case where effectively what we're saying is you're Yotzei Pesach Rishon, but you can't eat the carbon. But because you're Yotzei, therefore you don't have to do Pesach Sheni. Amra Abai, so we'll say according to this version now, Abai made a statement, Lo shon alashones arvula achar zrika. This is only true if the karbanos got mixed up together after zrika. Diba idna dis darek dam miha havi chazil achila, because this way at the time of zrika, everything was fit for consumption. Aval nisarvu lifnei zrika. However, if the karbanos got mixed up before zrika, chayavin la'asos Pesach Sheni. Halacha l'mais, you're chayiv to go ahead and do Pesach Sheni. So both say, so now we have this. So therefore, there's two versions as to where we apply or to what case we apply Abaye's statement. So version one is Abaye is going on the Mishnah. And Abaye says, when do we say that if the owner forgot what type of animal he wanted, he's Yotze Pesach Rishon, doesn't have to do Pesach Sheni? That's only if he remembered before Zrika, forgot after Zrika. Version two is Abaye's statement is going on a case of 5 karbanos that got mixed together. On the height of one of them, you find the wart, so one of them is disqualified. So Abaye says, as long as they weren't mixed before Zrika, everybody's Yotze. If they were mixed before Zrika, then everybody has to do Pesach Sheni. If they only became mixed after Zrika, then everyone is Yotze. So says the Gemara, Man demasniya masnisin kol shekina brayso. So the opinion who attaches Abaye's statement to the Mishnah would certainly agree with attaching it to the Brayso. Man demasniya brayso, but the one who attaches it to the Brayso, aval masnisin, no, wouldn't necessarily agree with attaching it to the Mishnah. Why? So the Gemara says, Kevan de ksherin dechi itkar havi chazi la'achila kamishmaya galya. Because I will say, since again we're dealing with in the Mishnah's case, you're dealing ultimately again with everything that is kosher. Should something be really what's happening in the Mishnah's case, I will say, was just a lack of clarity. It's just lack of clarity. In other words, everything is fit. There's nothing that's puzzled there. Everything is technically fit. There's just a lack of clarity which one the owner had in mind for. Versus the wart case, in that situation, again, there's something that is literally puzzled. All right, so the Gemara says as follows. If we look at Rashi, Rashi says, Kamishma Yagalya, Eza Bailim shall call Echad, V'hadam nitin lezrika, Shar inkam psul karban, V'afa pisha asal ochel. Fine. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, so what's this? Now the Gemara wants to go back and talk about this case of the wart on one of the 5. So Amar, Pesach Sheni. So remember the case we just mentioned. You have five individuals. Each of them had a karban Pesach. So let's keep it easy. Sometime after Zrika, all of the hides get mixed up. The karbanos get mixed up together, and you discover a wart on one of the hides. But you don't know, of course, which karban. So that karban was invalid. You don't know which karban was invalid. To which the Gemara says, but it's okay. All of them are Yotze, and they don't have to do Pesach Sheni. So the Gemara says, Amar Mara, Pesach Sheni. Why? Right? We'll say, remember, how can you say none of them have to do Pesach Sheni? We'll say, if there's one thing you know in that case, it's what? It's what? Definitively, one person was not Yotze Karban Pesach. That's for sure. Somebody brought an invalid animal. The Gemara says, Mishum Delo Efshar, because the truth is, Rabbi say, there's no other Eitzah. There's no other Eitzah. There's nothing to do. As we're going to see in just a moment, there's no other Eitzah but to say they're all Yotze Pesach Rishon. The Gemara says, Hey Chilavet, so what should we do? Leisi Kol Chad V'Chad Pesach. See, if you want to say we should have every single person bring a Pesach Sheni, you can't do that. Kamaisi Chulun La'azara. So we'll say, this is fascinating. So maybe you'll say, let's just err on the side of caution. Just have everyone bring a Pesach Sheni. We'll say, here's the problem with that Eitzah. Bringing a Pesach Sheni, ultimately, again, if you're not chayiv in Pesach Sheni and you bring a Pesach Sheni, that is bringing chulin to the Azara. That is bringing unconsecrated animals, unconsecrated offerings to the Beis Hamikdash, which is aser. Okay, so leisi kulu chad Pesach. So we'll say, maybe you'll say, well, I have a better idea. Let all 5 guys bring one Karban Pesach together. Right? Why don't you say that? Just let them all be one chabura. Can't do that either. Why? The Gemara says, Nimtza Pesach Nachal Shalom Lemenuyav. Because they will say at least one person in that chabura. Well, one person in that chabura is not chayiv in Pesach Sheni. In which case, again, halacha l'maisa, there's a chabura that's not fully fit. So the Gemara says, Haimai Nesi Kol Chaminay Pescho V'Nesni V'Neima Ididi Bamum Hai Da'isi Hashtan Havi Pesach V'Ididi Tam Hai Da'isi Hashtan Havi Shlamim. Okay, I have a simple eitzah. What's the simple eitzah? Bring Pesach Sheni with a Tanai. What's the Tanai? If I'm Chayv Pesach Sheni, the animal should be a Pesach Sheni. And if I'm not Chayv Pesach Sheni, then what? It'll be a Shlamim. Because also remember again, Pesach during the rest of the year is a Shlamim. Or to say a little bit differently, Karban Pesach essentially is in the Shlamim family. So why don't you just have everybody bring Pesach Sheni with a Tanai? The Gemara says, Efshar, you can't do it. Why? Tap of Peites. Mishum de'iga chazei v'shok de kohanim. I will say, because here's the difference. We'll say the difference is, remember, on a shlamim, there's chazei v'shok. There is the chest and the thigh. That's given to the kohanim. The problem is that by Pesach Sheni, that portion is part of Pesach. That portion is part of the Karban Pesach. Look at Rashi. Mishum de'ikar chazei v'shok. The shlamim shetzarach litna lekoin. The asher lo seista kol chad v'chad shema hay have Pesach. V'nimtza machil lekoin shlo nimna alav. Shabbos say, here's the problem. The problem is you can't go ahead and, what are you going to do with the chazei v'shok? Because at the end of the day, the chazei v'shok is part of the Karban Pesach. You can't just stamp give that to a kohen because he's not part of the chabura. To which the Gemara says, okay, v'nesi kol chad v'chad kohen b'hadei, so no problem. Let every single guy, every single chabura, make sure to include a kohen in their chabura. That way the kohen will get the chazei v'shok. The Gemara says, 1 second, hi kohen heichidami. Well, who's the kohen? Ida avid Pesach, dilma hai Pesachu, v'nimtza Pesach nechal shalom nuyav. If the kohen in question did Pesach Rishon, then what? Then ultimately, again, there's a Pesach Sheni being consumed by someone who's not really fit to be part of the chabura. Vida lo avid Pesach, and if you're going to look for a kohen who didn't do Pesach Rishon, dilma shlomim hu v'lo avid Pesach. Maybe that particular carbon is the carbon shlomim. It's not Pesach, and therefore it turns out this kohen will never do Pesach. To which the Gemara says, "V'nesi kol chamisha chad kohen the lo avid Pesach v'nimni iluya hani chamisha psachim." So why don't you go ahead? Or we'll say, let them all select one kohen, same kohen, and that kohen ultimately is someone who we know for sure didn't do Pesach Rishon, and let him be part of all 5 chaburos, which is an interesting suggestion. The Gemara says, and therefore again we know for sure that out of the 5, Rabbi, I know for sure that out of the 5. One of those, and let them all bring it with it tonight. If I'm chayv in Pesach Sheni, it's a Pesach. If I'm not chayv in Pesach Sheni, it's a shlamim. So let them all bring it with it tonight. And this way, when the kohen partakes of it, halacha l'maisi is for sure eating carbon Pesach. Demanav shach ika chadala avid Pesach. The kanaf kibei. One of them for sure is not a carbon Pesach, and let the kohen be yotze with that. Al mishum de kamemait bachilas shlamim. We'll say you can't do it. I'll tell you why. We'll say there is a concept that you are not supposed to do something which decreases the window of sacrificial consumption. So the problem is, if you go ahead and you bring a shlamim as a Pesach, you have diminished the window of consumption. Why? The Gemara says, "De'ilu Pesach liyom v'layla, v'ilu shlamim l'shnei yomim v'layla." I will say, Karban Pesach could only be eaten for 1 day and 1 night. I will say, again, even that is a little bit misleading. Karban Pesach really can only be eaten for how long? For how long? The Gemara calls it's really 1 night. You see, it's machlok, it's until chatzos, until morning. But l'maisa will call it 1 day, 1 night versus shlamim, which could be consumed 2 days and 1 night. So I will say, so what the Gemara is suggesting is you can't bring a carbon suffix shlamim, suffix Pesach, because by doing so, you'd obviously have to adhere to the more chomer standard of consumption. And if it's potentially a shlamim, you are diminishing the window of consumption. I v'naisi mosra Pesach. So said, this is very interesting. So maybe the eitzah is bring a mosra Pesach. Now, both say, just to understand, the classic case of mosra Pesach means a leftover Pesach. So the classic case of that is, I separate an animal, I separate a sheep to be my carbon Pesach. So what happens? We'll say, one of the distinctions between Pesach Mitzrayim and Pesach Doros is that Pesach Mitzrayim you were obligated to tie the sheep to your bedpost, right? So that halacha does not apply by Pesach Doros. So what happened? I designated a sheep, right? And the sheep, I lose the sheep. I lose the sheep. So what happens? I end up going ahead and purchasing another animal. And then ultimately, again, after I offer up, the second animal, I find the first. That's called Mosra Pesach. We'll discuss exactly what the status of that. Gemara says, why don't you use that animal? Why don't you use your Mosra Pesach animal, ultimately, again, as the animal on Pesach Sheni to satisfy this case of doubt? To which the Gemara says, "V'neima." Let the person say, "Ididi ba'mum hayda aisi hashana have Pesach." So we'll say, because remember, again, we're assuming that a Mosra Pesach has the same status as a carbon Pesach. So therefore, I don't run into the problem of offering up an animal that's suffix shlamim, suffix Pesach, and thereby diminishing the window of consumption. So just bring your Mosra Pesach and make it tonight. Ididi ba'mum hayda hashta and have a Pesach. If my animal was the one with the wart, was the one with the womb, so let this animal be my Pesach. Ididi tam hu nehavi hayda aisi hashta shlamim. And if ultimately, again, mine was the one without the womb, then let this animal that I'm bringing be a shlamim. The Mosra Pesach nechal yom v'layla echad. Because we'll say, interestingly enough, Moser Pesach can be brought as a shlamim, but because it was originally designated as Pesach, its window of consumption is that of a carbon Pesach. So therefore, I don't know. So therefore, I can satisfy both criteria. I could offer up this animal as a suffix shlamim, but at the same time, it's not considered as if I'm diminishing the window of consumption, because to begin with, the Moser Pesach can only be consumed like a Pesach for 1 day and 1 night. The Gemara says, 1 second. The Gemara for Shina Tchila Mosaros. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. Remember, Moser Pesach is a very specific case. What's the case of Moser Pesach? So we'll say, you can't just like designate an animal as a Moser Pesach, right? In other words, Moser Pesach only works if the Metzias that I just described to you actually happened. I designated an animal as Karban Pesach, then the animal was lost, I replaced it with another, offered up the replacement, and then found the original one. But that only works if mamish that happened. The Gemara makes it sound like just go and get a Moser Pesach. Don't just go and get a Moser Pesach. To which the Gemara says, v'nitzchu v'naisi Moser Pesach. No, the Gemara says, no. What I mean is, listen to what I was saying. On any given Yom Tiv, that's got to happen. Right? That definitely happens, where people lose their original carbon, and then they go ahead and they get a replacement animal, and then they offer up the replacement, and they find the original. The Gemara says, just look for that. So Gemara says, you're right, there's another issue. Elam mishum smicha. But let's say there's another issue of smicha. Why? Dila Pesach lo by smicha, vila moser by smicha. Because let's remember again, halacha l'maisa, the carbon Pesach does not require smicha, right? Which is the act of the owner is leaning on the carbon. Mosar does. So once again, you have a sacrificial distinction. So to go ahead and bring the Mosar as my Pesach Sheni, because again, I'm not sure what my status of Pesach Rishon doesn't work. The Kavanah are not similar. We'll say, so that's fine for men. What about for women? Because also remember again, we paskin that women don't do smicha. So therefore, again, the inability to do smicha is not a problem. Elamishum matanos. Rather, we'll say it's because of blood applications. Dilu Pesach matana achas ilu shlam shtayim. Because we'll say Pesach is 1 blood application, shlamim is 2, and therefore halacha l'maisa you can't really bring an animal. We'll say, remember again, you can't bring this animal with the tanai that if I'm not chayiv in Pesach, it should be a shlamim, because the blood service is not the blood service of shlamim. Shein dalet. So vilu shlam shtayim shein dalet. So the Gemara says, my nafkamin of hatanan kalani. Kalani tanan alam is be'achachison. Shenasan b'matan achas keeper. That's not such a problem, we'll say, because again, remember, any time you have a blood application, as much as like, for example, shlamim has 2 blood applications, which are 4, technically speaking, if you were to go ahead and only do 1 blood application, you would be yotzei. Ela mishum de'ilu pesach b'shvicha v'lo shlam b'zrika. But I tell you why you can't bring the animal suffix pesach, suffix shlamim, for another distinction. Pesach, the blood is poured on the mizbeach. Remember, we saw this before. This is where the Gemara discussed the idea that there was a space between the ramp, right, the ramp and the top of the mizbeach. So by Pesach, the blood is poured, right? Really, I'm going to call from. I don't like to do it, right? It's shvicha, it's poured. If you do shlamim bizrika, shlamim is sprinkled. It's sprinkled. So the Gemara says, my nafka. So again, different blood services. So my nafka, like Gemara said, that doesn't really matter so much. But Tanya, the Gemara says, but anything that was supposed to be done with zrika, but instead it was done by shvicha, yoyotze. So the Gemara says, 1 second. So the Gemara says, 1 second. When we say that these things work, they work ex post facto. But lechatchila, you cannot structure a sacrificial service like this. Therefore, I will say, interestingly enough, halacha l'maisa. So I'll say, let's go full circle. So the Gemara is saying over here, remember, this all goes back to one case. 5 of us, right, we all offered up our karbanos together. And then again, taking Abaye's distinction, what happens? After the zrika was done, we find that there's a wart on one of the hides, which means out of the group of 5, 1 person has not been yotzei his carbon Pesach. So the Gemara says, quoting Abaye, as long as this reality was discovered after zrika, everybody's yotzei and doesn't have to do a Pesach Sheni. Of course, no one could eat their Pesach Rishon because there's a suffix, one of those animals, one of those karbanos is puzzle. But Allah Chalamaysi, everyone's yotzei and no one has to do Pesach Sheni. To which the Gemara says that makes no sense. What do you mean everybody's yotzei? What do you mean everybody's yotzei? How can everybody's yotzei? We know for sure that one of the karbanos is puzzle. So what does the Gemara essentially answer? You know why everybody's yotzei? You know why everybody's yotzei? Why? Why? There's no other alternative. There is no other alternative. Remember what the Gemara just showed is because pretty much the only other alternative is for everyone to offer a Pesach Sheni, and that's simply impossible. There's no way halachically to construct that case. So because there's no way halachically to construct the case, therefore again, we just have to say, I guess everybody's Yotzei Pesach Rishon, although no one's going to eat of their Pesach Rishon, but halacha l'maaseh Yotzei. So I'll say very interesting, because I don't think it's too often that you find in halacha where we say everyone is going to be Yotzei because there's no other halachic alternative. I mean, there is a halachic alternative, which is what? What's the other halachic alternative? Everyone's not Yotzei. But that doesn't make sense either. Why? Because we know 4 out of the 5 are definitely Yotzei. So to say no one's Yotzei doesn't make sense. To say Pesach Sheni, you can't do it. So it's almost as if the Gemara says the only way for the halacha to structure itself is to say everyone's Yotzei, no one does Pesach Sheni, but no one can eat their Pesach Rishon. Really a fascinating case. But it's a great Mishnah. Homer Labanov, a man says to his sons, Harini shochet es ha-pesach al mi sheyala mekem rishon liyushalayim. So let's listen to his case. Our father says to his sons, listen, here's the deal, boys. Halacha l'maisa, whichever of you gets to Yerushalayim first will be included as part of my chabura so really what's happening, we can imagine the following scene. Father says to his sons, whoever gets to the Seder first on Pesach night will be part of my chabura for Karban Pesach. So the Gemara, let's say obviously this is talking about what kind of children. Going back to yesterday's daf, adult children, right? Because obviously minor children are automatically included. So adult children, father says to his kids, whoever gets to Yerushalayim first will be included as part of my chabura. As soon as the first son gets to Yerushalayim and literally the majority of his body enters the walls of Yerushalayim, Zacha b'chalko, he gets his portion, umezaka es echav imo. And ultimately, again, when he acquires his portion, he acquires a portion for his brothers as well. So the Gemara says, what's going on over here? Shmamina v'yesh breira. So I'll say, remember, what this sounds like is, remember, when is the sun showing up? Sun showing up at night. So what the father seems to be saying is, whoever goes out and shows up first, it's retroactively clarified that I had you in mind at the time of the shechita. So obviously we hold the breira. No. This is a different case. Rabbi Yochanan says this is not to be taken literally. This father had in mind all of his kids, right? In the chabura, he had in mind all the kids. So what was he trying to do? He was trying to encourage them for a little bit of zerizus, right? So he was trying. So what he made it sound like their ability to partake of the Karban Pesach is going to be dependent on who gets to Yerushalayim first. But in reality, he's just giving them zeros, right? He's just giving them positive encouragement. Whoever gets there first. So he says, "Dekanami diktani umizaka echav imo." Both say, and the raya to this is, what does the Mishnah mean when it says when the first brother gets there, he acquires his portion and the portion of all of his brothers? What does that mean? Shapir. So I'll say, if you say that what the Mishnah means is like this, listen, the father really included all of his sons in the chabura from the beginning. From the beginning, so as soon as the first son gets there, obviously everybody's part of the chabura. Ella. They will say, if you hold that the father did not include his sons, because people become part of the chabura after shechita, as well says, we're going to see actually in the next Mishnah, halakha l'maisa, the members of the chabura could come and go, right? As long as it all happens before shechita. Shmamina. So we'll say, you see from here that this Mishnah, this father was not making a halachic statement, but rather, again, he was trying to encourage his sons to be zoriz. And he said, whoever gets there first is going to get a chelik. But in reality, he included all of his children as part of the chabura. Taina Rabbi that supports this. I said, this is great. Ma'isa v'kidmu banos lebanim. That one time it happened that the daughters arrived for the Seder before the sons. V'nimtza banos zrizos ubanim shvelim. And it turned out that year, the daughters were the alacritous ones, right? They had zrizos, and the sons were ashtekel lazy. So again, it's interesting, by the way, that this is included here. It's interesting that this Mishnah is included because, again, it turns out that this is not a halacha at all, but rather, again, this is just a father engaging in positive encouragement, which also tells us something very important: the need for a parent to engage in positive encouragement. I will say, in the chinuch of one's children, it is incredibly important to push one's children to accomplish great things. There's this very fine balance. No parent wants to be pushy, and no parent wants to be, overly invasive in how they parent their child. But sometimes Rabbi say we're too easy on our kids. Sometimes we're too relaxed with our kids, and sometimes we let everything slide. Parenting is this incredible dialectic, this incredible balance where if I don't push my child to become something great, Rabbi say, remember again, we're all made of matter, and the natural state of matter is to be at rest until acted upon. So my children are not generally going to exhibit initiative to actualize their inner greatness. It is my job as a parent to act upon them and to push them, to encourage them to be zaras, to encourage them to be mitsuyanim, to encourage them to be great. Al pi darkom, right? Al pi darko, every child according to his way. And a parent has to know how much they could push before it becomes too much. But this notion of, and I think you see more of kind of like letting kids do their own thing and they'll find their way. I think it's highly flawed chinuch. Highly flawed chinuch. We have to start when our children are young, to push gently, encourage gently, to be able to actualize your greatness. Be mezares them. You're great, you're important, you have potential, and let me as your parent help you along in actualizing that. That's the halacha espoused in this Mishnah. The Gemara Mishnah goes, and I will say, let's go. The Olam, I will say, so what's the halacha? You could have as big of a chabura as you want, as long as what? There's at least a kezayis of meat for every single person. Good, that's the halacha. So there's no cap on the size of the chabura, as long as there is a kezayis for every person. But say the halacha, we just mentioned this. You can go ahead and join and withdraw from the chabura until shchita. So both say, so remember again, shchita is the moment at which the chabura is solidified. No one comes, no one goes. But up until shchita, people could be added and people could withdraw. Rabbi Shimon so Rabbi Shimon has an interesting shita. Rabbi Shimon says, no, in fact, you could add and withdraw people from the chabura until zrika. So we'll say, so a fascinating machlokes here. Essentially, at what point in time does the chabura close? Tanakama is saying, halacha l'maisa shchita, Rabbi Shimon zrika. Says the Gemara, my kamash malan. So we'll say, I don't understand. Why does the Mishnah have to say, or as well say, obviously the chabura could be as big as you want, as long as there's a kezayis of meat for everyone. But why does the Mishnah have to say that? So we'll say, what it means is as follows. That halacha l'maisa, even if there's one chabura, you could literally go ahead and add another chabura. In other words, we'll both say that halacha l'maisa, the novelty, and we're going to see this later on. That even if, let's say, this Pesach A started with Chabura A, and all of the members of Chabura A leave, and they're replaced with members of Chabura B, halacha l'maisa, that's totally fine. So even if there's no remaining member of the original Chabura, that's how much Chabura turnover there is, that is absolutely fine. We're going to see later on that Rashi quotes the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that halacha l'maisa, that's actually problematic, but the Mishnah is saying not like that. So remember again, the Tanakama said that you can go ahead and join and withdraw from the chabura until the time of shchita. So the machlokes is how to withdraw from the chabura. So the Rabbanan say that essentially the pasuk says that the when the Torah speaks about the chabura, the Torah says you could form a chabura as long as what? Mihios miseh. So the way the Rabbanan darshan that phrase, mihios miseh, michiyuseu seh. As long as the seh is alive, the chabura could be formed. So in other words, up until the time of shchita, people could join and withdraw from the chabura. Rabbi Shimon Savar, mehaviyosei diseh. Rabbi Shimon says, miyos miseh also means as long as the process or procedure of seh is still going on, you could join or withdraw from the chabura. So we'll say, how long is the procedure of the seg going on for? Up until zrika. It's interestingly enough, they're both quoting the same pasuk, but dramatic machlokes. Avalimanos, but I will say ultimately again, but I want to point out, Rabbi Shimon Shit Rabbi say is only by what? Is only halacha l'maisa. The Gemara is going to suggest by withdrawing from the chabura. So Rabbi Shimon says you could withdraw from the chabura up until the time of zrika. However, avalimanos, but to become part of the chabura, divrei hakol ad sheyishchat. Everyone agrees halacha l'maisa can only become part of the chabura up until shchita. Damakra B'michsas nefashos v'hader tachosu. So we'll say, because the pasuk says the number of people, and then it says tachosu, and the Gemara will see, will darshan tachosu actually means shchita. That supports this. The Rabbanon say that you can go ahead and become part to withdraw from the Chabura until the time of Shchita. Rabbi Shimon Omer Nimin Achi Yishchot. Rabbi Shimon says it's true, you can become part of the Chabura only until Shchita. Umoshchen Achi Yizrakada, but you could withdraw up until the time of Zikra. Both say we paskin like the Rabbanon. That halacha l'maisa Shchita is the solidification of the Chabura. So you could withdraw, you could join a Chabura up until Shchita, but once Shchita occurs, either you're locked out or you're locked in. But there's no change in the Chabura from the time of Shchita on. We do not accept the position of Rabbi Shimon. Amud Beis. Let's say Mishnah. This is a great case. Hamimana Imo. This is such exciting Gemaras. It happens to be, it's exciting when you have these short Gemaras, short Mishnahs, so much happening over here. So Hamimana Imo Achar Bechalka. Listen to this case. Listen to this. I'm part of a Chabura. Let's assume for a moment, by the way, we are all part of the same Chabura. So I have a portion. So let's say all of us are part of the Chabura. So we know pretty much how much meat each of us are going to get. So let's say for argument's sake, the way we divvy up the meat is each of us are going to get 2 kizesim of meat. Fine. So I decide to go ahead and, invite my friend Ruvain to join me as part of my Chabura. And I do so without the consent of the rest of the Chabura. Rashi says over here, al chelko, below das Chabura. So we'll say, so again, this is obviously before Shchita. So before Shchita happens, we already did figure out amongst us, we're each going to have 2 kizesim of meat. I decided, I'm not going to eat 2 kizesim of Karban Pesach. So I say, Ruvain, come join me. You're my +1. You're my companion pass, right, for Karban Pesach. So come join me, right, and you could have one of my kizesim. So we'll say, but again, I didn't inform the Chabura. So listen to this halacha. So B'nei Chabura can say, listen, Silber, you know what? Here's your 2 kizesim. You go eat with your friend over there, right? Go eat with Ruvain, right? We know that we're not really interested in that. So go ahead. Here's your Karban Pesach. Go ahead and eat somewhere else. We don't really want to eat with you. Then I both say this goes back to the sikhi we had before. Remember, how do we paskin? We paskin that Karban Pesach can be eaten in 2 locations, right? It's just what? One person can't eat in 2 locations. So remember, again, we saw this already before. You could take the same carbon, divide it into 2 pieces, and the group could splinter off into 2 chaburas, eating the same carbon in 2 places. It's just that one person can't eat in 2 places. So both say, this is incredible halacha. So I invite an and one without notifying the chabura. The chabura therefore has the right to say, take your meat, and you and your and one go eat somewhere else. We'll say, now watch this. This is a great case. Ibaylu, the Gemara asks another kasha. We'll say, get ready for this. B'nei chabura, shahayu yadav shel echad mehen yafos. We'll say, let's say now, this is not the and one, but let's say we're all a chabura. And it turns out the Gemara says that one of the members of the chabura, yadav echad yafos, he has beautiful hands. And I will say, now what does that mean? One of the members of the chabura has beautiful hands. This is great. Look at Rashi, yadav yafos. Lishna ma'alya. Memaher le'echol harbe. One of the members of the Chabura eats ridiculously fast. Now I will say, so listen to this. See, this is so great. You can imagine for a moment that all of us are part of a Chabura. Okay, I will say, now comes Seder night. What happens? We're sitting together. Ruvain is part of our Chabura, and Ruvain is shoveling in the meat like no tomorrow. And I will say, what happens? The B'nei Chabura look at this, and I will say, remember again, obviously, the more he eats, the less there is for everyone else. So one guy is just eating kinai nahara at a much faster pace. So it's interesting. What do Chazal call it? They say a guy with beautiful hands. What does that mean? He has beautiful hands. He's incredibly skilled at shoveling food into his mouth at a ridiculously fast pace. That's what's called Yar Eidam. So it's Lashon Ai, it's Lashon Saginar. It's euphemistic Lashon. So we'll say what happens. So we'll say, get ready for this. Ma'ushik Yom Rulo, Tol Chelka Chavetzei. So we'll say, can we tell this guy, it's Ruvain, this is ridiculous, right? Take your portion, because remember again, whenever you had a chabura, you knew how much meat everyone was going to get. Why don't you take your portion and go somewhere else? Just go somewhere else. So we'll say, first of all, isn't it incredible how it's such a most sometimes in life, we'll say, well, part of the essence of Pesach is achdos, right? Is unity, and how incredible it is that even the best laid plans for Jewish unity sometimes don't quite work, right? So here again, it's beautiful. Pesach is fantastic. And we'll say nothing ruins a Seder like a shoveler, right? Nothing ruins the Seder like a guy who mamish yadav yafos. So can we go ahead and tell Ruvain, listen, Ruvain, why don't you take your portion, have a good Yom Tiv, and go eat it somewhere else. Go eat it somewhere else. So what's the halacha? So miya minan, matzi amalu. So we'll say, can Ruvain say back? Matzi amalu, hachi kablisun, so we'll say, so listen, could Ruvain say, listen, you guys know me. I'm a shoveler. That's what I am. You know me. I was like this in yeshiva. No one ever wanted to sit at the table with me, right? I was like this growing up. So you knew I was a shoveler. So you have to love me for who I am. You accepted me into the chabura as a meat shoveler, and that's it. That's it. You are makabel me. Oh, dilamatzi lemeimer lehu ki kablisun letekuni zvicha daite da achalta tvei minei lo mekablinan. No, Ruvain. The only reason you're a member of the chabura is because, remember, the goal is we don't want any leftover. Rabbi, remember again, the goal is you want to make sure that you have a large enough chabura that there is nothing left of the current Pesach, right? That's the goal. I'm trying to avoid nosar. So the only reason we invited you to be part of the chabura is letakun, to be beneficial. We did not go ahead and invite you to be part of the chabura because remember again, what's the concern over here? What's the concern with Ruvain the shoveler? What's the concern? He's getting more than his portion, right? That's the concern. And I will say, by the way, that could have a lot of different concerns. That could be, depending on how skilled he is, it could be that Mama should leave someone else without a kizayis. So they say to Ruvain, listen, Ruvain, every person who is part of the chabur is part of the chabur to benefit the chabur. So there's no nosar. At the rate you're going, you are a detriment. You are a detriment because halacha l'maisa, again, you may leave someone else without a kizayis. Therefore, again, I will say, so which one is it? So isn't this fascinating? Does Ruvain have the right to say, listen, you know me. It's not like Panim Chadoshos Bolakan. It's not a Mekachtos. This is my reputation. You knew it when you invited me to be part of the Chabura. So you have to be Mekabel. That's it. Or can they say to Ruvain, no, you became part of the Chabura so that there's no nosar, but you have no right to put the rest of us at a disadvantage. So take your meat and go. So which one is it? So Tashma, Al Chalko, Rush Shabosai. Remember, this is the Mishnah. What did the Mishnah say? If I invite a friend to join me as part of my chabura, to share my portion. I will say now, in my case, remember, I'm not inviting someone new to take an additional portion. I just happen to have a large portion of Karban Pesach, so I invite a friend to be part of my chabura to share in my portion. So what's the halacha? Rashoin b'nei chabura litin lo shalo, v'hu ochel shalo v'hu ochel nashein. So we'll say, so remember again, the Mishnah said, the b'nei chabura have the right to say to me, listen, you take your portion, go eat with your friend, and we're going to eat as our own chabura. So my time, what's the reason for this? Rabbi say, my love mishum dahavile ki yadayim shel echem yafos. So Rabbi say, isn't this like a case of yadayim yafos? Right? So Rabbi say, what's the concern over here? So maybe the bnei chabura said, listen, we didn't invite an extra guy. You invited Ruvain, we didn't invite Ruvain. Ruvain sits down at the table. Who's to say Ruvain's going to be careful with just maintaining his particular portion? So because that, you know what, you and Ruvain, you guys go. You guys go. So the Gemara says, V'isa ha'daitcha yadav yafos. Matzi amrluhu kablisun nehavi haiki yadav yafos. So we'll say, but again, if you say in the case of yadav yafos, the guy's a bit gluttonous. So if you say that halacha lamaisa, if he has a right to say to the chabura, listen, you have to accept me as is. So in this case, when halacha lamaisa, I invite a companion to join me, so don't I have a right to say, listen, you invited me, this is my portion, I'm not encroaching on anyone else's portion, I have the right to divide up my portion however I want to which the Gemara says, Amrilo, Deos shiny. So we'll say that actually this is different. The Gemara says, Deos shiny, if you look at Rashi, Deos shiny, Ein b'nei chabura merutzin lios kol elu hadeos bechaburasam shemi akva le masuda v'lo mishum achili yisera ela afilu achli kula ela kechad gar ramatzi makler. So let's listen to this. The Gemara says there's something different over here. The b'nei chabura can say, listen, we're a chavra, we're a chabura. You invited Ruvain. We don't know Ruvain. So we don't want to have a suda with Ruvain. It's nothing against the guy. We just don't know him. But we're saying, the chabura, the Pesach Seder, is an experience. So we wanted this experience to be a part of a particular chevra. You invited someone new over here. We didn't sign up for that. So you want to go ahead. And we'll say, Rashi points out also, what if Reuven is a really slow eater? he's a really slow eater, and we want to kind of finish up. We want to wrap up the Seder. Or maybe he's going to say too many divrei Torah. There's always that guy at the Seder, right? Who's got an encyclopedia to share at the Seder. That's not what we signed up for. We have a chabura it's supposed to say. So interestingly enough, the Gemara says it's possible that in the case of the Mishnah, this is not about quantity of food, right? Even if he's not going to eat more than his share, we don't want him as part of our chabura. I'm sure he's a very nice guy, but we're looking to create a particular type of experience. So the Gemara says, "Inami tarvayu kecham nechaburahu da'achli matzi amar leidelo nechan inish nuchragaban." I will say our same idea that Allah Chalamayse, again, it's possible that even if Ruah is not going to eat any more of his portion, we don't want the stranger with us. We don't want the stranger with us. Again, we're having the Pesach Seder. We arranged a particular type of chabura. Halacha l'maisa, again, we're not interested in someone new. So the fundamental shaila, therefore, still is when one of the members of the chabura turns out to bring a certain type of behavior to the chabura that no one expected, what's the halacha? Does the member of the chabura have a right to say, listen, you have to accept me as I am, or do they have the right to say, no, we only included you as part of this chabura for our benefit, but if you become a detriment, take your portion and go. That's the shayla. So Tashma. So the Gemara says, try another attempt to solve this question. Tashma. Hashamish sha'achal kizayis basar b'tzaratanur. We actually saw this before. If the shamish, we said this was the case a couple of mishnayos ago, where we saw two chaburas, and what happened again? The shamish was there serving both chaburas. So shamish achal kizayis basar b'tzaratanur. If the shamish ate a kezayis, his kezayis have Korban Pesach standing by the oven. If he's smart, he should eat his fill while he's standing there. Because remember again, as we paskin, you can't eat Korban Pesach in two locations. You could split one Korban Pesach into two chaburos, but you can't go ahead and eat one korban in two locations. So the Gemara says, if the Bnei Chabura want to be nice to him, what can they do? They can go ahead and come to the shamish and eat with him by the side of the oven. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, ratzu in, lo ratzu lo. Well, so that indicates to us what? It's up to the Bnei Chabura to decide, do they want to join the shamish or not? To which the Gemara says, so the Gemara says, V'amai, ne'ema lohu ha'kablisun. Why can't the shamish say to them, listen, guys, you included me as part of my chabura. My job is I have to stay by the stove. So since you included me as part of the chabura, you have to come join me. Shani hasum da amrile, because they can say back to the shamish, ki kablinoch adaita dinitrach kamon. Lemitrach lon lididach lo kablinach. So they can say to the shamish, listen, when we included you as part of the chabura, that's because we included you to serve us. There's a benefit to having a waiter as part of your chabura. He could help serve. We included you to our benefit. We did not include you to our detriment. So Tashma, B'nei Chabura Shayadav Sha'achim Mehen Yafos. So we'll say this is back to the Yadayim Yafos case. The guy who eats at an incredibly fast pace. So if one of the members of the Chabura Yadayim Yafos, Rasha'in Lomar Tochel Kichavet say, they could say to him, listen, take your portion and go. V'lo ot, Ela Afilu Chamisha V'asi Siboles. We'll say even in a non-Korban Pesach case, let's say the following situation, you have 5 people who make a su'uda together. Rashi says over here, Siboles, Ta'aroves su'uda shall kol yemos hashana. This is any time that 5 people, and five is a random number, anytime that a group of people go ahead and get together to make a meal, Rasha'in lomar lo tol chel kichavet say. So we'll say, anytime you have a joint meal, and one of the people eats at a much faster pace than anyone else, and the rest of the members of the meal are nervous that there's not going to be enough food for them, they could tell that individual, listen, take your portion, and why don't you go? Take your portion and go. Shmamina. So the Gemara says shmamina. So we'll say ultimately, again, what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, in any situation of a group meal, be it a Korban Pesach or just a stam group meal, when the group feels that one of the people eats much faster than everyone else, and therefore may consume more than his share, they have the right to say to him, Tol chelkicha, take your share and go. Shmamina. So we'll say you see from here that indeed that is the halacha. So the Gemara says, my velo od. What does it mean velo od when it said also including the case of the siboles? Lomi by kamar. Lomi by pesach. So we'll say it goes without saying that you could go ahead and tell one person take your share and go. By karban, because let's remember again, by karban pesach, the whole point of a chabura is to ensure that there's no nosar. So the point of the chabura is to be something beneficial to everyone involved. When one of the people's eating habits put the others at a disadvantage, they could tell him to take his portion and go. Ela afilu siboles nami ditzavsa ba'almahu. But we'll say, but even by non-kar basis, by siboles, which is just a meal of companionship. That's just the chevra getting together. I might have thought that because there's no halachic construct there, you can't tell one of the members to take his portion and go. The Gemara says, so b'tzavsa ba'almahu rasha'in lomar tol chelkecha v'tzei. They could still say to him, even in a case of just a companionship meal, you're eating more than your share, take your portion and go. So both say, so again, what we see over here, we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up with the Ikad Amr and Miratz Hashem tomorrow. What we begin to see is this fascinating idea that in the construct of a Karban Pesach Chabura, when one of the members of the Chabura is consuming more than his share, they have the right to say to him, Tol chelkecha v'tzei, take your portion and go. However, that's different than the case of the Mishnah. The case of the Mishnah is even if there's portion control, we'll call it, halacha l'maisa, the members of the Chabura could tell me, I invited my friend to share my portion, could tell me to take my portion and go, because also they don't want to have seder with this individual. So halacha l'maisa, again, even for the Chabura, if they say, this is not our chevra, this is not our Chabura, they could also give me my portion and tell me to go. To be continued in Miras Hashem tomorrow.